Hey, welcome back, everybody, to Backtrekking, the podcast where we look back at the real-world inspirations behind classic episodes of Star Trek. I'm one of your hosts, Caliban, and what I want to know is if we can get more caffeine into Aractigino. I'm joined in this episode by my co-host.
I'm Gooey Fame, and this injury is from battle, I swear.
Today we're talking about two stories about war and what it does to the human psyche. It's the classic American novel, The Red Badge of Courage, and the DS9 episode, Nor the Battle to the Strong.
It's a fun one.
Oh, yeah, we're going to have a lot of fun. Yes. It's dark stories, but important stories, I think I would say. And we're back to doing a novel. This is a novel. I don't know what the page count has to be for it to be a novel. Over 100, but it's short, but it's a novel.
It wasn't as tasking as Moby Dick or anything, but
yeah, I don't know. I just assume, it has to be readable. Novels from a certain era were all serialized, like in newspapers, so I think they can only be so long.
Oh,
You can't do War and Peace in a newspaper, or maybe they did. I don't know. We're not talking about peace and war. We're just talking about war today. We don't have any news to talk about really on the show, so I just figured we'd talk about what's going on in our lives. What's happening with you right now?
Right now, I mean, I've been still doing virtual theater and Zelda Dungeon stuff, which has been fun. So I've just been playing I'm always playing Zelda, preparing for that.
Have you guys commented at all on the look at the new Breath of the Wild game?
Yes, yeah. Well, that's definitely been that's made some waves for sure, because it's been years of, only little teasers or announcements of delays and stuff. But now there's a title and other things that people are theorizing about what could be in the game. So it's definitely a pretty. It's coming out soon too, like relatively speaking. So it's like everyone has now. It went through like kind of like a brief lull, and now everyone's like getting switched on, getting fired up.
And it's interesting. I mean, as a longtime Zelda head, I guess you could tell me, like, it's not often that they do a sequel to a Zelda game. Like, they're usually all separate, in different worlds or different times.
Yeah, the closest, or even if they do, it's like it completely different. Like Zelda 2 is so different than Zelda 1, but yeah. This feels like and it's along the lines of like they did Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, and Phantom Hourglass. Spirit Tracks kind of had that, where they're like, it's like the same kind of game, but a little different. And I think it's probably because those were both pretty big games at the time. So, and Breath of the Wild, of course, is like one of the biggest, if not the biggest Zelda game. So makes sense that they're doing another one.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely want to play a sequel. And I'm not, Breath of the Wild kind of got me back into playing Zelda games after a long absence. But I'm certainly looking forward to see what they do with that world. And it just looks like, anybody who's played Breath of the Wild knows how expansive the world is. I know it's not the first like open world game that they did, but it's just so big and so persistent. And what we've seen of just the little snippets of video and screenshots, it looks like it's going to be once again huge, and also have a lot of levels. You're going to be like flying around and just totally expanding more the scope of
the verticality of the whole world and everything. And other people were speculating on like you see little like craters in the ground, so there's like maybe even you go deeper into the ground, and I would love that. I think if you were going that level of scale of traveling from below the surface to up in the sky would be amazing.
Yeah, it makes me think of Minecraft, kind of.
Yeah,
in the way that,
sure.
I mean, Minecraft is building, obviously, but because it's so simple and basic, you can have a really deep map, or I suppose build really high as well. And kind of taking that idea, not necessarily, crafting or building things, but just having a world that keeps going. Rarely would you just run, that thing in video games where it's like, oh, this is an invisible wall, I guess I'm not going any farther here. Just get rid of that totally. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that would obviously that'd be amazing.
Is there a game that's so big that you're just on like a planet, and like if you walk far enough, you'll just end up back where you were?
I don't know. I don't think so. Not
Because
that
it's
I
a
know
video
of.
game. Like, it doesn't have to be as big as actual Earth. It could just be so big that you're just heading in one direction for a long, long
Sure.
time, and then eventually you just end up back where you were, coming the other way.
I feel like that would be a great gimmick for a game. That, especially in the world of open worlds, like
Yeah.
now you could promote it as like this is like double ultra open world,
I'd like, yeah. Well, I mean, it's open world, but technically it's closed world because you will end up back where you were eventually. I like a gimmick in a video game. I don't like it when a video game is just a gimmick, but I like it when they do things like just, change the geometry, the physics, do things that you can't do in the real world. Like a good example would be, like the Portal games are really great with that.
Oh, yeah,
Or
yeah.
the Psychonaut games, which take place ostensibly in the real world, but then you enter these like psychic landscapes, and so up can be down, and you can be and things can be bigger on the inside than they are on the outside, and you're not limited by the rules of reality.
Yeah, makes it more unique, more memorable for sure.
Speaking of gimmicks, I just started playing today actually the release from last year, Deathloop.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Which just came out on, I have a subscription to one of those services. And I didn't, so I'm a cheapskate, but I didn't think that it looked worth $60, but I definitely waited for it to come out and be free. And so I've been playing it. I've only played it like a couple minutes today before I was getting ready. And yeah, it seems kind of interesting. It's got that same time loop thing. It's roguelike in a way, but it combines that with the mechanic of having sort of rewinding time, and I like things like that. It reminds me of Prince of Persia, which they kind of gave up on that. Like we haven't had a Prince of Persia in a while.
Right, yeah. It seems like too now there's a lot of these like I think there was like 3 major games last year that were like a time loop sort of game.
Yeah, it's popular.
And I haven't really gotten to play any of them yet, but they always intrigue me. I was a big fan of Majora's Mask for the Nintendo 64. That kind of was like probably one of the first games that ever had that sort of thing.
I think the Prince of Persia lag is probably due to, well, the last one that they made didn't sell well, but a lot of that focus has gone into the Assassin's Creed series.
Right.
By
yeah.
Ubisoft.
That was where they developed it originally as a Prince of Persia game.
Yeah, and then they're like, wait a minute, what if we made this in the Crusades? That's fun. We'll do that instead. And of course, I have to bring that up because we'll be talking about Assassin's Creed later in the year on the show, trying to keep myself honest. I also should be, whenever I'm playing Deathloop or something, or Zelda or something else, I really should be playing Assassin's Creed because I have to make a college try at getting through these. And it seems like every time I turn around, there's another one that I didn't know about.
Whoa.
I'm not playing the DS ones. I'm not doing that.
So you're trying to get all of them in before the episode.
As many as I can, yeah. I'm
Okay.
not going to play the PSP one. I do have a Vita, and I am playing the Vita one. And then the other day, I watched a X-Player. Somebody did like a retrospective video, and they mentioned one called Freedom Cry, and I'm like, "What's Freedom Cry?
Yeah.
What's Freedom Cry, Precious?" And so that's a DLC game that I missed for Black Flag. So that's available on the PlayStation Store, and I get it because I'm a subscriber member. So now I got to go back and play that a little bit. And so yeah, I'm making my way through.
Your effort, I appreciate. I'm probably gonna maybe squeeze in one more, maybe. But I'm just going off of I've played more than 5 of the games, so I feel like I got the idea. You
definitely probably get a good sense of it. Yeah,
I don't need to play 5 or whatever that one was.
I guess we could talk about the announcements that they've made recently about the series. Announcements which are a little confusing. There's some announcements that are more clear. There are definitely more games coming. They're doing a big push with the 15th anniversary of the series, and they're releasing a game set in China. I think they're releasing one set in Japan. They've talked about the new main title, Mirage, which will be taking place in the Middle East, in the Levant. And the idea of Assassin's Creed Infinity, which I had to have somebody try to explain this to me, but it's apparently going forward, they will be getting rid of, or at least de emphasizing, the modern day story elements, and they will be replaced by this idea of infinity, which is like a hub or a platform. So it's going to be from, I'm just going with what I understand it to be. I could be totally wrong, but it will be something of um, a pre-game that you kind of load up, and as new games, new DLCs come out, they will load in, and so it's sort of like you are in the Animus, and you can say, "Well, I
Ah,
want to launch Valhalla today," or it's like, "No, I'm going to follow the story now to Mirage," and I think that way, obviously, they probably going to try to get you to pay monthly for it, but it's also a way for them to maybe just do like a Freedom Cry, like do a shorter game and just release that and have a platform where you can just get that instead of them having to like spend 4 or 5 years developing another game.
yeah, and I,
Games as a service, that's the future.
that yeah, and I guess like it fits thematically with like I thought they were actually going
Yeah,
to do
they're
that a
the
long
one.
time ago.
Yeah, they're the
Like
one like company that has an excuse to do this. When Nintendo tries to get you to download every Mario level individually, it's like, all right, you bastards. But this actually kind of makes sense in their fiction.
but and if you would have told me a while ago, I would have been like, great. I don't like that stuff, but I think sort of just become after replaying one of the older ones, I've kind of become like, oh, this is cute. Just thinking about it that way. But now
Yeah.
that you mention it, I hope on this service maybe there could still be some sort of like meta narrative to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I hope that's what they do.
Like one
Because
day
I
you
like
boot
that.
it up and it's like, but when you hit start, you're like, you're playing a character coming out of the animus. It's like, what's going on? You know?
Wait, oh, you're being hacked. Yeah, yeah, it's going into
Yeah.
your brain. Yeah, sort of like the Matrix. So yeah, I hope that's cool, and we'll get to see more of that as the days go on. But yeah, we'll definitely be talking about the Assassin's Creed series, and gotta watch this movie too. Looking forward to it.
Oh yeah, yeah. You gotta watch that.
The Assassin's Creed film, which I'm sure they're proud of. So they're gonna have to try again at that pretty soon.
Yeah, that seems like an obvious one, and I feel like why wouldn't you? It doesn't seem like it should be that hard actually.
They did. They have. So I never saw the film, but I have played enough of the games that I've seen them sort of half-heartedly try to adapt the events of the game and the characters into the narrative. So you find like emails or messages where they're talking about Marion Cotillard's character and events that happen in the film, sort of trying to not totally say it didn't exist,
Oh,
but
interesting.
sort of assimilate it a little bit.
Wow.
So going off of the idea of them having a hub, I mean, maybe they could just you could download the movie and just and
Oh yeah.
go into the movie, inside the hub. So I'm sure they're having all these ideas at Ubisoft headquarters, just like we are.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Not sure what it's gonna be like in the future of Assassin's Creed, but they will find a way to extract more money out of people for sure.
Yes, the search for more money. Well, I'm looking forward to hanging out with famous people in the future. But in this particular scenario, we'll be hanging out with people and killing them for our featured subject for this week's episode. Do not weep, maiden, for war is kind is the first line in a collection of poems by American author Stephen Crane. Crane's collection, War is Kind and Other Lines, was published in 1899, a year before his untimely death at 28 from tuberculosis. Crane spent his short life as a writer and journalist, studying human nature and the effects of isolation and societal violence on individuals. Though he never fought in a war, he was drawn to military fiction as a child, and he wanted to see a war tale that surpassed the cold dispassion of historical account, a story that could capture not only the stark and awesome sights of a conflict, but also the violence that war inflicts on the human psyche and the bitter and empty pretexts that humans embrace in an effort to survive. The result, the classic American war novel, The Red Badge of Courage. Everybody reads this in high school. Did you read this in high school?
Maybe.
I'm wrong. Not everybody reads this in high school.
Here's the thing, though. I don't think I read any of the assigned books in high school.
Yeah.
So
okay.
a lot of them I don't remember because of that.
I'm probably right there with you. This is one of the first books that I remember. I was very similar, with my little young, undiagnosed ADD brain. I just really could not focus on anything that I didn't like or hadn't been convinced to like. And so I probably was reading 5 other books at the time I was supposed to be reading The Red Badge of Courage. But I remember making a specific effort because in our unit, which was probably, 2 weeks on the book, we would go through chapter or, groups of chapters by chapters. And I remember being totally unprepared for class one day and thinking, what they're talking about sounds cool. Like maybe I should really knuckle down and try to get this thing in. And I remember lying in my bed, probably not a good idea, trying to read the book and kind of falling asleep and kind of waking up and reading some more. And the whole thing having a kind of dreamlike quality and really not ultimately remembering anything about it except for just the general idea of what we think we all know it's about. So I was pleased to find that when I did sit down and read it as an adult, I flew through it. It was totally captivating for me and lived up to the expectations that I think I had put on it and that society puts on it. Like it's one of those books. Sometimes you read something or you see a movie or something that's like, oh, people are excited about that. But I think this absolutely deserves like its reputation, and I know why it's lasted as long as it has.
Yeah, I agree. All the praise of it that I had previously read like fit the bill perfectly when I read it. I was like, oh, yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Crane was he was an interesting guy, and unfortunately died a young guy, but he, he came from privilege. His father was a doctor, and I think his like great-grandfather or maybe great-great-grandfather was a Revolutionary War hero. And so he was interested in military history, and I think that he really wanted to join the military. He went to like a military school. It wasn't like it wasn't like West Point or anything like that, but it was like a boarding school that, had sort of military rules. And he, speaking of ADD, didn't do well. He was very bright. He had begun writing when he was like 4, and he loved writing and reading, but was not a great student, loved baseball and football and sports, but did not focus very well. And eventually he went to college, and he was only at college for like a couple semesters before he's like, I don't need college, I'm out of here. And he moved to New York with his brother. And at this time, the sort of like bohemian era was beginning, in the salons, people inventing new ways of thought and hanging out and probably drinking absinthe and things like that. And so he kind of did that for a while and sort of, I can imagine him as kind of a rich boy who's like slumming it. But at the same time, he was like observing people and gathering their stories and becoming fascinated by people's lives, but also the sort of hardships that people go through. And so he wrote, his first book was a book called Maggie, A Girl of the Streets. And it was about a woman who lived in the Bowery where he hung out a lot, who has to face like, these horrible, just horrible trials on the street and has to sort of like sell herself. And it became like a hit. And he had also been writing articles. He had been working as a journalist and reporting on this kind of true crime beat as well. And he started to think, I've always loved war history. I was never in a war, but I heard stories from the old veterans and I've read all this stuff and I really want to read a book. Why isn't there a book that talks about what people go through? It's always about people being heroes and they charge up the hills and you don't fire until we see the whites of their eyes. And the American Civil War had been the first, war that I think had really affected America, seeing Americans kill Americans and having the horrors of the trenches and amputations and prison camps like Andersonville and fighting over slavery. And it had really affected the American psyche. And he wanted to see that reflected in war fiction. And so he decided that he was the guy to do it. And he started writing this book. And it didn't, his publishers, or no publisher would touch it at first, but eventually it was published serially in a newspaper. and was later published fully. And he became like a total celebrity. Like it was like people were like, "Oh, this
Wow.
book is so good." And so he kind of lived off that for a while. And he wrote more poems and books later, but he was like, okay, so now I'm going to do it. Like this is my brand. And he became a war journalist. And so he started going to, different conflicts and reporting on the wars. And that's kind of what he did for a long time. He had a couple interesting other things that happened to him. Like he was traveling on a ferry and the boat sank. And so he was stuck on a lifeboat for a couple days.
Wow.
And he ended up writing a book or a short story, I think, called The Open Boat, which is basically like a story about a bunch of people on a boat who are all like ready to kill each other and like eat each other because because they're all desperate to survive. And so a lot of his stories were like that. You know, he was one of the premier American naturalist writers. He didn't write in the nude, but he wrote in the style of naturalism, you know, which was a rejection of romanticism, which was to say that, you know, let's face it, man is an animal. He experiences the same urges, and all of society is a cover, you know, to cover up the fact that, you know, we are just kind of creatures, and God is not going to answer your prayers, and so we tell ourselves whatever we need to get through that, and that is like exactly what's happening in this book. Like that is Henry Fleming's life to a T.
Yeah, the whole time I was reading it, I was thinking about how just recently you mentioned something about like romanticism in Star Trek being a key like feature of often a lot of episodes, most of the movies and everything. And reading this, I was like, this is it's like
the
almost
opposite?
It's the opposite in tone and it compared to like, it's funny sometimes we'll watch like you know, Forbidden Planet or something, and it's like, oh, like Gene Roddenberry must have like loved this, you know.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and I think, you know, there are some romanticist books or romantic books that I really like, but I definitely see, you know, like naturalism or realism is like the cool kid that's like flicks a cigarette. Yeah, you don't know what you're talking about, man. God isn't listening to you.
Yeah.
It's definitely trying to like take romanticism down a peg. And you totally get that here. Like the fact that I hope that people have read the book, but I guess we should let people know, you know, this is a book about the Civil War, and our main character is Henry Fleming. He's this young kid. I think he's like 17 years old. And we get the idea that he lives in, I don't know, some town in America, the north part of America. And he doesn't like his life, and you get the idea that it's very provincial, as probably many people's lives were. But you get that for all of his possible personal faults, he's intelligent. I think that really comes out later. One thing that Crane does in his writing is he uses a lot of dialect. And so you get the idea that some of these other soldiers and people that he meet are like real, you know, yokels. And he uses the term yokel a couple times. But Henry's pretty well spoken compared to them, whether or not he comes from like a vast education, you know, or money. And so he hears that the war is on, you know, and he thinks he's going to get glory in war. That's what he's going to do. He has this idea of himself as being this incredible hero. And of course, the cute brunette girl who's always making eyes at him would be a lot nicer if he comes back from war with a scar and a story. And so he tells his mama that he's going to enlist. And, you know, off he goes. And that first like sort of chapter, first like act of the story is it's so bleak. And I wonder if I had paid attention when I was 17 or younger reading this, I wonder if I would have identified more with Henry or his mother when I was younger. Because now I identify with his mother. And the fact that he's like, Mama, I'm going to do this. You can't tell me what to do. And she's kind of like, at first she's like really naggy. She's just a naggy mom who has to keep, 10 kids alive probably. But we don't know where his father is. But once he finally goes, she's just like, all right, son, I made you some cookies. Keep your socks dry. And she's like, I don't know what to do, man. All right, good luck. I don't want you to go, but I know that there's nothing I can do. This is just the way it goes.
And I sort of got the feeling too, like, because he almost had like the character almost had like an outsider perspective or whatever. I was almost thinking was like it more reflecting like him exploring it like psychologically himself, you know, like maybe
Yeah.
he's not totally that character, but you know what I mean? I think he's,
Yeah.
because that's probably true of a lot of the characters where he's trying to get inside their head and like think about what is going through their minds in any given moment. And because we're more through the main character's point of view oftentimes, like that's kind of where I think he would be drawing from, is, you know, imagining it for himself, you know.
Yeah, it says in the text that he had long despaired of witnessing a Greek-like struggle. Such would be no more, he had said. Men were better or more timid. You know, he has this, he's already got this like goth kid kind of like, oh, nothing's cool anymore. You know, it's like, I want to go to like a cool war, but clearly nothing like that could ever really happen. You know, we're just too advanced as people, you know, here in America. So now that's even, I won't even get to be like a cool war hero because like, you know, nobody does that anymore. And of course, those expectations are completely shattered when he gets to the war, although not right away, because he's initially very unimpressed with his time in the service. You know, he's immediately, I mean, they get like rudimentary training and then they're thrown out there, and for weeks they just sort of camp, and he calls it like the procession, the blue procession, where he and his comrades in arms just hang out and do nothing and just speculate about what's going on. This is, of course, way before radios or cell phones or anything. So a big factor of the fighting in this is that nobody knows what's going on. And even the commanding officers aren't exactly sure what's going on. And so everybody just sort of follows the chain of command, expecting that their leaders know more than they do. And Crane at times takes pains to show that, you know, even the brass doesn't quite know what's going on, but they know that you're going to go charge. They know that they're going to whip their line into charging the enemy's line. And so I thought that was really interesting. Like a lot of the actions seem futile. Even the cause seems futile. I think it seems futile from like an author point of view, but Henry certainly questions what the hell he's doing there, you know, many times. Even why he came in the first place, like cursing himself for even joining up.
Yeah, it feels very like tense too when they were waiting around, and like not the whole like not knowing what's going on aspect. It really made it feel like just like being on the job, and like, you know, like when management fails and everyone's like, what's going on, and you're, you know, just standing around wondering what to do. I feel like that was very relatable. It made it just feel like another day, like at some crappy job almost, only like way worse. And so like, all everyone could do is sit around and just talk about, you know, how they're going to do in the fight when they actually do it.
Yeah, at least at first. Then they are called to march somewhere. Of course, they're not told where. And he starts to have doubts about himself. I don't think that he is supposed to be... I think that he is probably a critique of the overeducated liberal, probably. Although Stephen Crane was very liberal. But like the idea of seeing war from a distance, dispassionately, and overthinking things. I mean, Henry is definitely a neurotic, even though I'm not sure they had that term back then. And as soon as they start heading to where they're going, he really starts questioning, like, what am I going to do? Like when the guns start shooting and the shells are flying, like, am I going to, I'll probably be fine. I'll probably be fine. But you know what? The one thing I want is I want like to see fear in somebody else's face. Like I want to know that like I'm not the only person, because he's very concerned with his reputation and the idea that anybody would think of him that he had done something shameful. And so he just wants to see one other face that seems scared. And I don't know if he knows how to look for it or not, but he doesn't find it. And he basically just ends up like spinning himself, you know, into this tizzy over like, man, nobody else is scared. I'm the only person that's scared. That's insane.
Yeah, he spirals out of control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. He finally gets to the war, and even before like people start dying, I was thinking like he almost, and again, they didn't have this back then, but he almost goes through every stage of the Kubler-Ross progression,
Oh, yeah.
of loss, like denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. And he eventually reaches a point where it says that like, he must look to the grave for comprehension. Basically like, woe is me, soon I'll be dead, and then I won't have to worry about this anymore. And like nobody's even shot at him yet. Like he's just totally like losing himself.
It totally like the whole it's a very like well, it's a pathetic display, I guess.
Yeah.
Though you're supposed to, I guess, it's like that's they're already like showing like all the things he is self-conscious about happening. Like it I think it's trying to show that it's like a extremely normal thing. You know what I mean? It's not like he is uniquely cowardly or anything.
Yeah, I don't think that there's anything special about him. We're just sort of like inside of his head, specifically. And so that's...
And it's interesting sometimes, like, viewing the other characters, because, like, some seem unfazed, but, like, I don't know, it just left me wondering, like, what's going on in, like, everyone else's mind as well,
Yeah. we get because we're seeing it through limited third person omniscient, but mostly kind of through Henry's point of view. Like we get shades of what other people are experiencing through his two friends that we focus on mostly. Jim Conklin, and I think Wilson is the other guy. And Jim is like he's a guy who seems to have a pretty good head about him. I don't know if he's been in war. I think he says he hasn't been in war before, but he seems to have a pretty sanguine sort of idea about what they're going to encounter. And then you get Wilson, who is just like a big loudmouth. And he sort of evolves over the course of the book into a different person. But I think you get the idea that that's how he's compensating for like the uncertainty and the fear that he's feeling. He's just like, I'll kick anybody's ass. I don't care.
Yeah, everyone has like a unique way of coping with what's going on. Yeah.
Well, the regiment goes into their first battle, and it doesn't go well. They are basically fired on and routed by the enemy. And in a moment of confusion, Henry runs, basically. Like he sees other people taking off and he's like, oh, this is it. All right, we're going. I'm going to go. And he runs, and he doesn't just retreat, like he flees, like he just keeps on going. He goes so far that he ends up like in the back lines. And as he is leaving, he is making all these rationalizations to himself. Like, I was smart to run. Later on, people are going to be like, oh, you were smart. Yeah, there's no way we could have won that one. And just as he's sort of thinking this, he passes by like the officers' camp, and he hears the general or somebody that he thinks is the general say like, oh, we did it. Oh, we won. Good job. Okay, everybody. Like you held and we stopped the enemy. And so now he's like, fuck, like not only did I run, if I had stayed, I might have been okay. I'll never live this down. If I even go back to camp, I will be the laughingstock of everybody. And of course, his pride cannot handle that. And so he just keeps on going. And he just decides to just keep walking. And God knows where he's going to end up. But he cannot return to his regiment.
It was like in those moments, it actually reminded me a lot of The Thin Red Line. Because that movie often shows like kind of these... It's a little different, but it has this whole idea of like no one really knows what's going on. Like we're all just like a bunch of, creatures on this planet type thing, show some grass or whatever. But it also particularly reminded me of it because they show these really like kind of pathetic moments on the battlefield. Like when Woody Harrelson, blows his butt off or whatever.
He blew his butt off.
And I don't know, yeah, it just kind of made me think of that presentation of like this, like there isn't this grand, thing everyone is following. Like no one knows what's going on. It's kind of pathetic,
Yeah. There's a part where he is he's basically walking away from his regiment and going God knows where. And he sees he keeps hearing reports of the fighting, and he looks up and he sees a squirrel in the tree, and the squirrel is like chittering, it's clearly like distressed, and it sort of peeks out from a branch. And he thinks, yeah, there you go. There's my sign. This is the sign from nature. This squirrel is a dumb animal, but it recognized danger and it's hiding and it ran away. And so obviously I did what is natural to nature. And he's deranged. Like, he's like, you aren't a squirrel, guy. Like, you're not out here, for squirrel reasons. Like, you're supposed to be out here for war. Now, I'm on the side of Jim Caviezel only in The Thin Red Line, which is like, this war is stupid. Why are we fighting? Do you know what I mean? Like, war is horrible. I get why you'd want to just hang out and drink coconuts, but you're here for a reason. You are not a squirrel. So he's not only is like nature show, he's seeing the reflection of his own nature in nature, but he's not even a human. Like, he's a little rodent animal. Yeah, and he takes like comfort in that. That's how messed up he is. He thinks that that's a good thing.
That kind of, to me, fits with what the overall like story is sort of getting across, that it's not like that's not like all of reality, but that's like an aspect of reality, is that there are like these greater forces, of like, how you respond to things that kind of control your actions, so like him arguing that is again why I guess I kind of connected him with the author a little bit more, because it felt like that's part of his natural thought process of trying to like understand the character.
Yeah. The book, The Thin Red Line, was written by James Jones, who I don't know if he has ever said that he was inspired by Red Badge of Courage, and I'm sure The Thin Red Line. I mean, it's possible, but he was also wrote in the style of naturalism. So I think that's that's a good catch on your part.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know, because there is something still like, maybe it's not romantic, but just like, in that movie, there's like all the weird poetry and stuff like that.
It's beautiful. It's poetic, but I think it's definitely naturalism
for sure.
James Jones wrote in the mid 20th century, and of course this book is from the mid 19th or the late 19th century, but very similar. From that scene with the squirrel, he finds this weird space in the forest, which it's described as almost chapel-like, not nurse chapel, but where the boughs sort of form like this kind of space, and it's very beatific. There's sunlight coming in and birds chirping, and in the very middle of it is like a dead soldier who has clearly been dead for a long time. Like, his face is a skull, and his uniform is all rotted. He can't even tell if it's blue or gray, and it's just this very stark image. Like, in the center of this locus of peace and tranquility is this death. Like, his self-calm is permanently spoiled now. This specter is going to haunt him no matter what.
Yeah, that's very, very haunting image. Yeah.
Naturalism isn't necessarily, I mean, there's definitely symbolism in naturalism. That's not off the table. And there's definitely symbolism in The Red Badge of Courage. Another thing that I remember, and it's probably the thing that made me want to start reading more of The Red Badge of Courage, like when I was not reading it in high school, was the fact that it's really where I was introduced, I think, for the first time consciously to the idea of symbolism.
Really? Okay, yeah.
I remember our teacher saying, like, okay, so you've got this character, Jim Conklin, and he's a really nice guy, right? And he seems to have like a lot of good advice for people. And then he gets shot in the side during a battle, and he runs out in the middle of a field, and he doesn't want anybody to help him. He wants to go alone. And as he dies, he stretches his arms out like Scott Stapp, and he falls back to the ground and dies. Now, what is that? What do you think that means? And nobody in the in the class said anything. And the one girl who, she had other qualities, but she was known as being like a churchy kind of girl. She's like, he's Jesus. And the teacher's like, yeah, he's Jesus.
Oh, okay.
His initials are JC. Yes, and this book is full of religious imagery. The church, the sun is described as being, wafer like at one point. I wasn't a Catholic, but of course the communion wafer. And so there are all these, religious symbols in this iconography in the book and in the images of nature that we see.
What do you think that's like getting at? I didn't really like, because I read it very much like, it was talking about how we're sort of like a product of our nature almost a little bit. We're these natural beings, and so with the religious imagery, I was wondering what that meant.
I think my high school English teacher is retired, but we could probably call her up.
Like, I felt kind of dumb when I was.
I think, Mrs. Johnson, I'm sorry. I think that it's open to interpretation, and I think intentionally it is. But I think that certainly I think the chapel is representative of this refuge that he seeks. And there is no refuge there because even death is there, know. And as far as the character of Jim Conklin, who in this case would represent Christ, he's not Christ the Conqueror. He's not healing anybody. He dies in the first third of the book. Like, Jesus is out of this thing, So I think maybe it's also the things that you believe don't matter when you're under fire. Like you can hold on to ideals, you can hold on to patriotism, you can hold on to religion. But the fact is that, and as Henry learns later in the book, you got to save your own ass here. That would be the sort of naturalist interpretation, I think.
Or what if the guy literally was the man from Earth, and he had lived all this time only to go out like that?
Yes. What if Logan from X-Men Origins Wolverine was there as well, and he was not? If you had in the opening of X-Men Origins Wolverine, they show him fighting in all these battles. If you had one Logan in your squad, you're never gonna lose, right? Like, how does Logan lose a battle ever? He must have been fighting on the right side the whole time.
He probably has to like fake it a little bit,
Yeah. Oh, sometimes he goes like, all right, I've had like 6 good encounters. Now I got to like, oh, no, I'm down.
You don't want to get found out,
Yeah. I'll shoot myself in the leg. Just the right spot. Yeah. Well, speaking of having wounds that aren't necessarily what they're supposed to be, Henry eventually falls in with a company of wounded soldiers. This is the sort of extreme rear guard. And there are a lot of people with wounds, people who are recovering. He sees, the misery that war inflicts on soldiers. And he gets into a scuffle with another soldier who is kind of panicked. And the soldier, it basically is just like, help me. And the soldier kind of freaks out on him and hits him in the head with his rifle butt. And Henry gets gets like a concussion, gets hit in the head. And so he's kind of out of it, and he's kind of on Dream Street for a while. And he is found by another soldier who's like, oh man, are you hurt? Let me help you. I'm hurt too. Let's get together, with the hospital train here. This character called the Tattered Soldier.
Yes.
And
yeah.
That is the Tattered Soldier is a very interesting character because he is very, he wants to help Henry, but his speech is kind of disordered. It's clear that he's not doing too well himself. And as Henry starts to get his strength back, he gets kind of freaked out by this guy. And I think that this guy represents in some ways, Henry's own mortality, like the scariness of sickness and wounds and death. And Henry eventually splits on this guy, just kind of like runs off and leaves him. And the guy's like, wait, no, I need your help.
Yeah.
And Henry just sort of like just tears off.
He is like confronting it. He can't handle it or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And later in the book, he looks back on running from the battle and he feels shame about that as he's kind of like taking his accounts. But the thing that he feels the most bad about is, being uncharitable to this guy, probably on the day of his death.
Yeah. And it's almost like he's like, there's like almost like he spirals with that shame, he's like almost becomes, he's like ashamed of it itself,
Yeah. Yeah.
And also with you mentioned the name of that soldier is like the Tattered Soldier. Just like one little thing I liked actually was, even though it is like this pretty psychological book, it's kind of like some slightly detached. Maybe it is to feel more natural, but like we know that oftentimes they just call like a lot of the characters like the soldier or whatever, even though
The youth. Yeah.
we do know their names, the youth, the Tattered Soldier. And I felt like that was just like, is very like blunt almost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I just like that little detail, I guess.
They're depersonalized, not because so we can connect to them more, to make them more universal.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Henry eventually stumbles back to his regiment at night, and I believe it's Wilson at that point finds him. And Wilson's a lot nicer than he used to be. And he sees that Henry's hurt, and he takes care of him, and Henry gets to rest. And Henry starts doing what he does. He starts trying to reassemble his sense of self-worth and his self-image. And he thinks specifically like, oh, they think I got shot in the head, so they don't think I'm a coward. Everything was a mess, so nobody's going to blame me for running away. He says in the book, he had performed his mistakes in the dark, so he was still a man. Which I thought was like, yeah, all right, man. If that's whatever you need to tell yourself, okay.
Yeah, that's him. He's like trying to rationalize it, and I guess it's not like I was sort of thinking like his response to that is like deeper shame, but I don't know if you could word it as that, because he's more like trying to be self-assured about it, but I still think it's because he's like deeply ashamed.
Yeah, I think so. The next day, the regiment sort of gets themselves back together and they go back out on the line again. And at this point, like he's getting pissy. At this point, he's like just sort of over the whole thing, and yet they have to do it again and again. And so he's being kind of an asshole. And he hears one of the lieutenants, one of the COs, talk about his company and say that they're nothing more than mule drivers, which is, oh boy, that's a bad insult back then. You don't call somebody that. And he brings that back. Kind of unwisely, he and Wilson sort of bring that back to the rest of the company, and it starts to sow like unrest in the company, which is not a good idea when you're fighting a war, but they're all being emotional, and they get commanded to basically to charge and to take this other position. And they get out on the field of battle, and it's another rout. Like they're just getting hammered. He's seeing people die left and right. There are some really, even for the time, I think, kind of gruesome depictions, literary depictions of men meeting their ends and the futility of the whole thing. And at one point, the guy, the color guard, the guy that holds the flag, goes down, and not really like understanding or knowing what he's doing. Henry kind of grabs the flag and becomes the guy who's holding the flag. And they eventually kind of turn it back around and get back to their own lines. And he realizes, almost in a haze, that he didn't run away, that he conquered the fear that he had during the last engagement. But he also realizes, perhaps somewhat distantly, that he wasn't like thinking, oh, I've got to keep America's flag up. I wasn't doing it for the men around me. I wasn't doing it for my mom. I was just pissed. Like I was just really angry, and I was just trying to survive. He said there's a passage in the book that says, there was the delirium that encounters despair and death and is heedless and blind to the odds. It is a temporary but sublime absence of selfishness. And so he thinks like, yeah, I mean, I guess I did a good job, but I don't even know how to call that back. Like, I don't even understand what it was. Like, I was just out there doing it. And apparently, everybody else in the regiment is also like, do you see that, Henry? Henry, you were like kicking ass out there. You were a madman. And he was thinking, what are you talking about? Like, I was like an animal. I was snarling. I was like barking at people. And they're like, yeah, keep doing that.
It's like both encounters, he's felt like he's purely on instinct and not like any sense of like self-realization or anything. And
he's a Jim Hickey, they said.
A Jim Hickey, yeah.
Yeah.
So he's forever caught in like this thing where this neuroticness, I guess, like you said, where he he's looking for something, trying to discover something about himself, but he just can't reckon. He keeps over-examining himself and freaking out, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So obviously he still doesn't have a good sense of himself. He's still not exactly sure why he's there, but he does know now that the COs don't know what they're doing. And that is confirmed when they come up and say, I like how in the text it says like their CO is basically, he seems like he's embarrassed to say it, but he's like, we got to go out there and charge him again. Sorry, everybody. It's just what we got to do. There's this fence that the remainder of the enemy, the Greys, are hiding behind, and we have to take this fence, like this useless piece of land. And at this point, he's just completely like resigned to his fate. It says in the text that it was clear to him that his final and absolute revenge was to be achieved by his dead body lying torn and glittering upon the field. And then they'll be sorry, right? Like, once I'm dead, oh boy, you made a mistake. And so they go out there, and once again, it's just a furious melee, and they're just running out there. And as they get closer to this piece of land, this fence that these guys are hiding behind, you know, he sees that the other soldiers are also like they are. They're desperate. They're gaunt. They're bearded, and they're just firing at them. And eventually he wants to get their flag. So he's collecting flags now. He wants to get theirs so bad. But his buddy Wilson beats him to it. And he's not even mad. Like, that's Wilson's triumph to have. And so they beat these guys, and there's just like 4 guys left. And every one of them is like, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. They're still defiant as prisoners of war. And even at that point, he's like, man, they're mad, and I guess we did it. But I don't know. You know what? I guess I did okay. I guess we did it.
Sure.
I guess we won this thing. Yeah.
That also reminded me of Thin Red Line, where they actually like encounter some of the Japanese soldiers up close, and there is sort of that feeling of like, what is it? Like, these people aren't.
And that scene where the Japanese attack, but they get word of, this is Thin Red Line, right? Or maybe this is, no, I'm thinking of the Pacific, the HBO miniseries, the Pacific. Okay. There's a scene where, a lot of the fighting is like jungle fighting. So it's not quite Vietnam, but it's very chaotic and unorganized. But at one point, the Japanese are going to like try to ambush them, but they get word of it. And so they set up like this field of fire, and the Japanese it's a slaughter. They just run into this complete massacre. Even the Allied troops are like, geez, God, we feel kind of bad. Like, these guys are getting killed. And there's like one Japanese guy left, and he's just like, he's speaking Japanese, but it's just like, fuck you. And he like takes his helmet off and throws it at them. And he's just like, he's just so mad that they just got completely wiped out in this just chance encounter.
Yeah. And it's also reminded me of it because it just is similar. They don't really go into the politics of either war, No. And not to say they're not important, obviously, but it's just like to sort of portray like what this experience is like. I don't know, it detaches it from this idea of like this glorious, thing that you're doing,
Yeah. Once it's all over, I don't, they're probably going to go back to war again. I don't, he might die like right after this. There's actually Crane wrote a sequel story where we do see Crane Fielding as an old man. So we know that he does make it through the war,
okay.
But after this engagement, they're called off the line and they get to march in the other direction finally. And I think as it's sort of like ironic, dramatic irony for us, I think that we know that he hasn't really learned anything, but he feels like he's got to put these experiences together somehow in his mind. And so he's like, you know what? I think I did okay. Some in the good column, couple in the bad column, not too bad. It says in the text that he says he thinks about like, all the bullshit that he talked before and how that was stupid, but now he's smarter, and he felt a quiet manhood, non-assertive, but of sturdy and strong blood. He knew that he would no more quail before his guides wherever they should point. He had been to touch the great death and found that, after all, it was but the great death. He was a man. It's just like, okay, dude. All right.
Whatever you got to tell yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that is, I guess that is, the argument they're trying to make is that people are just like a product of like these crazy things that happen to you, and you try to reckon them with, you know, how you perceive the world, I guess. Like take all these crazy experiences and like put a meaning to it, or like a story to it, you know?
Yeah. And I wonder if it's probably, I don't know. I mean, in the great volume of like human writings, there's got to be something before the Red Badge of Courage. But I think that the Red Badge of Courage is, at least for American literature, the real beginning of the introspective, you know, war novel or war story. Because almost every war story now is, unless, you know, Mark Wahlberg's like starring in it, is going to be a story about about the futility of war, you know, from Apocalypse Now to, you know, Jarhead or Generation Kill, or any of these narratives is about these guys telling themselves what they have to get through, you know, what they're experiencing, and how it'd probably just be better if like nobody showed up for the war this week.
Mm-hmm. You can't even you can't often do the glorious war movie anymore. And you can get the same ideas across though by kind of copying this though, you know, because there's plenty of like, oh, I'm sad and introspective, but it's like those guys over there made us do it, you know?
Yeah. Like Saving Private Ryan is probably the closest that you get to something like that, where it's like, yeah, we take the time to like humanize one of the bad guys, but you know, ultimately, yeah, sorry, guy, you got to die.
Right. Yeah. Like every, you know, not every, but all the post 9/11 like Iraq War movies are, you know, about how, oh man, like we had to go do it, but we are sad about it.
Yeah, I wonder if anybody who wrote any sort of more modern war narrative, you know, in the post internet age, has looked to Red Badge as a specific inspiration. And the kind of things that I wonder if the kind of problems that they had in war that should be or are intended to be alleviated now, the lack of communication, the fear of amputation and disease. You know, I'm not saying that obviously people die in war, but you know, our medical technology has come a long way, and so maybe that's not quite so scary. Having kind of creature comforts that you wouldn't have. They were eating, you know, salt pork and biscuits back then. I wonder if like we've commoditized war, you know, and made it, you got to get your Instagram, TikTok, you know, from Iraq or whatever. Like if somebody has tried to tell a story with a similar theme, but with the modern trappings of our military exploits abroad.
Yeah. Like, can you do the drone version of this? The drone pilot.
Just a drone that's flying. Flying through the mountains of Afghanistan.
I like that better. It's from the drone's perspective. I was thinking,
what happens when I come upon that wedding? Will I quail or will I blow it up? Yeah.
And it's just someone behind a monitor, like, you know.
Well, I mean, supposedly that's a Good Kill, right? The Ethan Hawke movie, which I have not seen yet, and I want to see. But yeah, the war story is different. I wonder what Stephen Crane would think today.
Yeah, I want to check that out.
I wonder what Stephen Crane would think of The Thin Red Line. He's like, this is boring. He's looking at a bird. What is this? Where are the explosions? Yeah, plot twist. That. Stephen Crane would love John Wayne war movies. Give me that Tora. Love that.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that's kind of like where you sometimes you make something like, but like you're not into it as much. Like I know a lot of people who like make a certain type of music, but they're like, I listen to like, and it's something completely different. You know, maybe he's like that. Like, oh, this is my style. This is what I like to write. But like, yeah, I really just like John Wayne movies.
Yeah, Norman Mailer would have loved the Fast and Furious series. I know this to be true.
Oh yeah,
in my heart. Well, that's the story of the Red Badge of Courage. It is. Who knows how copyright works these days, but it's old enough that it's free. You can find it anywhere. Mm-hmm. It is a quick read. I absolutely suggest that anybody who is remotely interested, give it a shot. You will really enjoy it, and it will give you a lot of perspective. And if you are a fan of war movies or you just get dragged to a war movie, if you read this, you'll really see a lot of the parallels and see where a lot of the story construction from modern war tales come from.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, our battle with this part of the story is over, but let's take a break for a word from our sponsors. We'll be back with more backtracking.
At Cinema Recall, we want to present to you the finest in film analysis.
Yeah, like action and gore and sex.
We will look at classics by Kubrick, Lynch, Godard, De Palma, and Coppola.
I don't know who the that is, but I'm looking at classic bodies of Christina Hendricks, Keanu Reeves, Salma Hayek, Ryan Reynolds.
We are a serious show for film lovers who enjoy indie foreign films, art house gems, and classic black and white features.
Well, I enjoy big budget blockbusters with great action and sexy people. Maybe our podcast can celebrate all aspects of films, like people who feel like your weird way and like people who feel like my weird way can like get together, man.
They can?
Yeah.
Huh. You know, I like that.
Cinema Recall is available everywhere you find great podcasts. Follow them on Facebook and Instagram under Cinema Recall Podcast and on Twitter at cinema_recall.
Okay, we're back. It's time to talk about the Trek side of this equation. Star Trek is, by design, pretty optimistic. Sure, the ship has guns, but they're only fired in self-defense, and most on-screen conflicts are depicted through energetic camera shaking. But the series Deep Space Nine, from its inception, strove to upset Trek's status quo and to throw the sanitized and peaceful world of the Federation into stark relief against the primal struggles taking place along its borders. The result was that war would be seen not as a tidy affair where stun settings meant opponents would live to fight another day, but instead the series would depict battles as bloody and costly affairs that would wound our characters both physically and spiritually, whether or not they were prepared for the blow. Jake Sisko has led a relatively sheltered life as the son of a station commander, but when he goes looking for a war story, he gets more than he bargained for in the DS9 episode, Nor the Battle to the Strong.
Call to the field of battle.
These people need you. Things could get a little rough down there.
Thrown to the dogs of war.
The Klingons. There's no stopping them.
Jake will confront an enemy
The explosion, they kept getting closer. I had to get out of there.
he never knew existed.
People are dying.
What lies between courage and cowardice is pure terror on the next Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, it is very, like, interesting, the stuff they tried to explore in Deep Space Nine. But I feel like this sort of, the way they portray this episode is like still very much like an expression, I think, of like the philosophy of old Star Trek, because just the idea of like they usually, you know, they do find war horrible. They try to avoid a conflict at all costs, you know, in Next Gen and stuff like this. And this episode shows why, you know, like it's just an explanation of why.
Well, let's talk about that. And before we do, just in case anybody's interested in the allusion or where the title comes from, it is a biblical allusion to Ecclesiastes 9:11, no relation. And the verse goes, I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill, but time and chance happeneth to them all. Which is like, that's naturalism right there, right? It doesn't matter. People don't get their just desserts. It is what it is, and the universe is pretty cold and uncaring. Kind of weird. Somebody sneak that into the Bible. But what's interesting about...
There's a Bible quote for everything, I feel
pretty
like.
nihilistic,
What are you guys talking about?
The interesting comparison between the Red Badge of Courage and Star Trek's view on war that you were kind of getting at is that, like, I think that this is a good story to try and tell, but I don't think that you can tell a one-to-one story like the Red Badge of Courage in the world of Star Trek, because the Red Badge of Courage requires the world and the universe to be ultimately uncaring of the struggles of humans. And I think that Star Trek, although it is, nominally atheistic, but yet a universe where even though it's atheistic, it's a moral universe. I think by definition, I think the good succeed and the bad are punished. So it would naturally contrast with a naturalist universe. Yes, at the end of the episode, Jake's like, war, man, what is it good for? Like, why is anybody doing this? But it isn't like even your own efforts in saving people are worthless. Do you know what I mean? Like Star Trek would never say that. In fact, the reason that they didn't enlist on some whim. They are going to this planet specifically because people are asking for help. And that is always shown, and I think it should be, in Star Trek as being the right thing to do and something that will be ultimately rewarded. It would never be, and then they all died, and it was really sad, and it just goes like, why did my son do this? And no help was ever given to him. It's a complete contrast.
Mm-hmm. It's, I see what you're saying, like, Star Trek often promotes, like, even Starfleet at its worst, when they have things like Section 31 or whatever, they ultimately show them striving over that.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, that's a dark element that is sort of out of line, but even that, it's in the theme of Star Trek because it's about overcoming these types of situations or groups or whatever, these feelings. And yeah, I guess that's kind of how I feel it does that with the war. It kind of reminds me of those like I was saying, like propaganda-y films, not like as a whole, but just that element of like almost no matter what, like they're in this war because they have to, they don't want to.
And they're there for, I mean, we know from other episodes that the Federation didn't start this war. It was the Klingons. Mm-hmm. And that they don't want to perpetrate it, but they don't have any choice. And so they are, reluctantly here. They are here for fictional reasons. Do you know what I mean? Like, hey, Ukraine didn't ask to be invaded by Russia. I mean, they're definitely the good guys. But like usually in war, there is some purpose here. Hardly ever is somebody completely innocent. But in this case, the Federation is like, hey man, we're just, we don't want to get killed by Klingons. We're just doing that. And obviously the side of the North was also, a just cause in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah.
But in the world of Star Trek, you can be completely blameless and also shoot a lot of Klingons. And I don't think that like that really applies to like real life.
One thing about Star Trek, and maybe this doesn't fully work with the war element, but I think it has it both ways a little bit, because I think it does acknowledge often that we are, we are like a very, we're not a perfect, like humans aren't perfect, maybe Starfleet, well, Starfleet's even not, but they don't question that as much, but humans, and we come from, humble beginnings and all that stuff, and maybe we're not like special, but it's sort of I like the like belief in oneself that like maybe because of that we could all come together and like create a better world, so I feel like I feel like it acknowledges that sort of feeling that we are all just a bunch of animals. I think Trek often acknowledges it, and so I do find that just back to the romanticism thing, I find it often inspiring that it's like, despite that, we maybe could become great,
Yeah, I think that's a romantic idea, yeah. This episode is based on a lot of things. It's partially based on the Red Badge of Courage. I think also they took inspiration from the war reporting of Ernest Hemingway, who, was a war correspondent, an ambulance driver, and collected his experiences, wrote about his experiences in A Farewell to Arms, and the work of people like Stephen Crane and Ambrose Bierce, and, having somebody report on a war but not be a part of it necessarily. And I don't know, other than the answer being it's tough to write, I don't know why there aren't more journalist characters in Star Trek. I think that, I like Jake, and I like little boy Jake, and I like Jake wants to get some action Jake, and I like Jake's looking for a baseball card Jake. I like Jake, period.
I like Jake, yeah.
But I would have loved to have gotten more journalist Jake. You know what I mean?
A few more episodes for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And just like his role is so perfect in this. And when you think about all the things that they had to pull together in order to make this series that was kind of a Trojan horse series, because it's like, sure, Gene, everything's going to be great. Is he dead? Okay, we're going to fuck everything up. Let's do this. Let's make a series that questions everything that Star Trek has said up to this point. Does it on the outskirts of the, it's a Western basically, and Sisko is the Marshal, then also have a war storyline, and then also have a character who is like a war journalist who is going to go into it idealistically and then come out, scarred by this experience that he has. The fact that they could get all that together is just an amazing accomplishment that Star Trek has not replicated, I don't think, since.
Yeah. Yeah, it made me think of too, like just from the how they put it all together, like with the story of using Jake and everything too worked really well, and it just fit thematically with what I was saying about the book, in that it felt like the author was almost kind of drawing from it felt like the way you get that naturalistic style is you maybe even try to like imagine your mind in that situation, because like what other insight do you can talk to other people, but like you're really trying to draw to the like bare emotions. And so I like that in this it was like now that author who's going through that is like literally a part of the story.
Yeah. One thing that I think that they could have done is leaned into that a little more. As the episode starts, we have this setup where, Jake is planned to write a story about a Bashir, and he made a huge mistake because Bashir is incredibly boring and this is not going to be a good story. And he, later jumps at the chance to go to this war zone so he can, have a great story. And it kind of starts with his inner monologue, which is not, I can't think of any other Trek episode where we hear a character's thoughts that's not telepathy. Do you know what I mean? They don't usually tell stories
I thought
like
it was
that
awesome.
in Star Trek. It was good, but later on it becomes the conceit of it is the article that he has written. You know what I mean? And so maybe they didn't want to give too much away of where Jake would end up at the end, but you guys are writers. If they had started it with the conceit of this is his log, this is his captain's log, this is his story that he has written based on his experiences, I think it might have been it would have satisfied my storytelling OCD.
Okay, no, because maybe that's just how I always interpret it, or maybe I've seen it before, because when I started watching it, I was like, oh, this is cool. Like every other character gets their own like log, but like why why would he do a log? He's not Starfleet personnel. Like they don't make everyone take logs. And so I immediately was like, he's like a journalist, he's writing, so this is his log, and so I don't know, I guess I made the leap of faith and I kind of expected that.
Well, he says something to the effect of like, "Oh, he's really boring. If I don't find a way to get out of this article, my first article is going to be boring." But I mean, like that's essentially like what's happening. So give him a pass. I don't. We've already seen an episode where, for the show, where Bashir has a similar experience, The Quickening, where Bashir goes to this planet, and in his capacity as doctor, he is forced to deal with the horrors of war and its effects on citizens. And so it's fine that we don't focus on what Bashir's doing, but Bashir looks like he's having a good time. And I'm like, where's the Star Trek MASH show where it's a bunch of like wisecracking doctors, fixing people up from the battlefield, and then also like a lot of poignancy.
Yeah, we kind of wax poetic for a while.
It's their black humor, about, how do you want to die? Oh, I want to get shot in the face. Oh, that's pretty good. Yeah.
Well, back on the station too, it reminded me of that when they just introduce everyone by like getting the coffee right or whatever.
The contractual obligation scene where it's all right, everybody got a line. Now you can all disappear. But for some reason, we're all real interested in if Quark can make this decaf Raktajino.
It's amazing. It's such a like last season of a sitcom sort of vibe.
Yeah, right.
But it's just, I don't know. Every time
Got to get Kira a line here somehow.
I guess
Raven's going to be mad.
I know it is because of these reasons of like, oh, we have to get them in here. But for some reason, I always think of it as such a like strength of the show, and I have such a bias towards the show. But every time I go back, it could
definitely
and watch
be a hangout show. Yeah,
I'm like, yeah, but it's because the characters are so fun and interesting. Like, there's great characters in all the tracks, but I feel like they're just the most fun and unique on this show. So I love going back and getting these little scenes of them just goofing off.
There is it's a little worrying that Quark and Worf are on the same side vis-a-vis women's body rights, though.
Well, it makes sense though. I think Worf is that's the order. Quark then Worf is like the two more like conservative guys.
Yeah,
on
well,
station.
Just that's chilling alone. What you just said, but
yeah, well, we've seen how Worf
true.
reacted on Risa, you know,
about that's true. Yeah, he joined the Westboro Baptist Church.
Yep, yeah.
It's the structure of this is not exactly similar to Red Badge of Courage, although it does follow kind of a structure of threes in terms of the contact and the interface that Jake has with people that are involved in these conflicts. There's actually another story or a narrative that this draws from is All Quiet on the Western Front.
Oh, right,
probably the movie on the part of the guys that wrote the episode, but also the novel that came out around the same time by Remark, which is in the style and tradition of Red Badge of Courage, one of those war not so great, kind of stories from the point of view of the Germans in World War I, and several privates, who fight in the trenches and see horrible things, and then have to come home and try to put their experiences into perspective. And in All Quiet on the Western Front, there's a scene where two soldiers share a trench in a similar way that we see to the episode.
In that, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't they kind of do a thing where they sort of obscure to like the names and the specifics of the war? Am I wrong about that? In
Western Front?
Yeah. I feel like
I'm not sure. I don't know if they're real conflicts. They do that in Red Badge of Courage. People have speculated on what battle it's supposed to be, but Crane has said I wasn't trying to do like a specific battle.
Yeah.
Just to give you the idea of a battle. I do know that like in Western Front, it's a French soldier that he shares this trench with, and the guy is dying. And in the initial script for the episode, they wanted to replicate that, where Jake falls into a trench with a dying Klingon warrior.
Oh.
And that was, I think, Hans Beimler's original sort of take. But Ira Steven Behr was like, no, we don't want to do that. Like, have it be a Federation guy so Jake can see, this Federation guy who is almost ready to kill him, but has done something so brave, which is to like basically just stay behind so his other troops can get on the hopper, and we can like have that be a foil to Jake just booking it like the first time a shell falls and like, goodbye Bashir, it's been good to know you. I'm off. We'll never see each other again.
It's a little bit nicer in here because it's like they say over and over, Bashir's like, I shouldn't have brought you here. You're not like a soldier.
Yeah, but he totally lets him off the hook. He's like, oh no, I'm so sorry that I had to bring you here. Yeah.
Yeah, so Jake doesn't have to feel as bad as
although he has the same thing as Fleming though, because he comes back to the hospital and he's like, what am I going to tell these guys?
Oh, it's still an element.
Know that I just ran.
It's still a big part of this. And the scene in the trench is, I think, one of the most intense scenes in Star Trek.
Yeah,
I was like really taken off guard by it.
I want to die. I was looking up. I don't want to die face down.
It's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's the tattered officer.
They should have a guy like that in what's the arena when they go to and like first see what happened to the Gorn.
Oh,
imagine if there's just a guy like, I'm gonna die. It's like,
well, we'll get it in season 2 of Strange New Worlds.
Right? Yeah, I want the real
Gorn. Don't let him get you.
Oh, they totally will, because they love doing.
Ate my guts.
They love doing the really gritty, like freak you out intense episodes.
Nurse Chapel's puking her guts out. Yeah.
They'll do a war is scary episode for sure.
We have a interesting character, the cowardly soldier, who shoots himself in the foot, kind of taking the pressure off Jake having to be a guy who pretends that his red badge of courage, aka, the wound that he received in war, came from the enemy and not from a friendly source. And this is an interesting guy. We were only supposed to see this guy the one time when he comes in and he's like, I swear to God, it was them. And the doctor's like, okay, fine, whatever. And they're just fixing him up. And Jake is sort of disgusted at this guy. And it turns out that the episode was a couple minutes short. And so they wrote a new scene with Jake and that guy. And I'm glad they did, because that second scene is one of my favorite scenes. Yeah, in the thing, watching this guy feel better that, he's probably going to get court-martialed, but what does that even mean in Starfleet? They just go, naughty, naughty. And then he's like, what am I going to do after this? But as he starts to think about having to live the rest of his life as the guy that shot himself in the foot, things don't seem so great.
Yeah, and it, even though it, like, we just said it takes some of the heat off of Jake, it's like, obviously Jake is, like, reckoning with what he's going through via looking at him, getting an insight into how he feels and, like, connecting on, like, how much guilt or, like, whatever should he feel,
Yeah, like, this guy, he'll get drummed out of the service, I guess. He will go back to the communist space lesbian society of the Federation, and he can do whatever he wants. But really, the only thing that you have in a society without money is, like, your status and reputation, right? And so maybe he's considering, like, what he's going to tell people, or if there's ever any way that if he really is a coward, he'll be able to sort of, balance that in his social books. I would hope that, and I would imagine that people of the Federation would be like, big deal. Like, we don't want to be in wars anyway, so you're not good at war. Hopefully that would be the right idea to have after this conflict is over. But when the phasers are flying, people aren't thinking like that. And so he has to sort of live with what he did.
I would imagine that's what they would go with, because the other way also seems like dystopian, where it's like, the society
but
where
that's where DS9 has to kind of pull back on the utopianism, and so we get episodes like this. We get episodes like the Siege of AR 558, where they go to the planet and, like, are these characters, did they walk out of a James Cameron movie or something like that? You got the guy with, like, the necklace of Cardassian neck bones or whatever. It's just like, Jesus Christ, what's going on? Are you Federation people? Really? Did you guys pass the psych tests? I heard about psych tests in this episode.
Right. Well, that's like where they make you save a guy from a burning room.
Right.
To overcome the death of your father or whatever.
Yeah. He was sick the day they did the Kobayashi Maru.
Well, they can always play it like, this is on the fringe, the outskirts. What Cisco says, like, it's hard to be a saint when you don't live in paradise or something like that. But what's disturbing about what you're presenting about the soldier going back is that he'd be going back living in, where it's cozy and nice. But, if everyone's really concerned about him not being a war hero, it's like that seems almost pretty dystopian too.
Maybe we don't see, because of Gene Roddenberry, we don't see what the Federation is really like. We know that the Federation and humanity in the future has aggressively pursued peace, equality, a lack of capitalism nominally, the lack of inequality in society. God, they love reading their Victorian novels and doing plays. And Quark says in that episode, Siege of 558, that, like, you got to watch out for these guys. They seem nice, but if you take some of the things that they love away, watch out. So maybe in the future, they pursue war like as strongly as they would Parisi's squares or rehearsing for a play or something like that. Like they don't want to go to war, but once they do, like, look out. That's how America likes to see itself. And
right,
of course,
yeah.
Starfleet and the Federation is how we want to see ourselves. But of course, America is embroiled in wars all over the world and has been for the last 200 years. So I don't know. Maybe someday somebody will have the balls to once again tell a story like that in the Star Trek universe.
Yeah, it's a very complicated issue for sure to try and reckon with, like Starfleet as a stand-in for, when they say
Space
us
America.
at our best self or whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah. It's like, oh boy.
Yeah, we'll see. I hope so. I think that the end of the episode is a bit of a cop-out, and I wouldn't want to trade the, like, wisecracking ER people, but if we had, like, got rid of them, we might have had a little more time for Jake voiceovers or Jake struggling with his own problems, because by the time the Klingons break in and he starts firing that phaser wildly, the episode's basically over at that point. Like, he just wakes up, Sisko is there, the Defiant has arrived, and he's kind of out of the situation. And that's what we expect of, like, our character we know is going to be back next week. But I wish there had been a little more. I feel like, once the shit finally hits the fan in Siege of 558, it really comes down, like Nog loses a leg and Quark has to shoot somebody, and like it really plays out. This is more just like, well, you've learned the lesson and now it's over.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. I think just because it fits in with the tone of like that other episode you mentioned and stuff, like it feels like it has more impact because it just kind of was like not setting up, but kind of getting across the same idea, of the show. So it felt like it continues on, but I guess we don't really go back to Jake either. That, like you mentioned, that would have been really good.
Yeah. I would like to, if you're going to have a character be challenged like this and kind of not meet the challenge, it's only fair to write another story where they do succeed. They're faced with something similar and they know what to do, and they do succeed.
I almost like that Jake doesn't ever have like the sort of like heroic Starfleet sort of success, like I like that out of all these special super smart people we see, everyone's learning like quantum physics when they're 5 years old. I'm sure Jake is very smart, obviously, but like I just like seeing a character, and particularly a kid, who's just like what it's like normal, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like just like a regular guy, not like Starfleet material,
messy room. Yeah.
Even Wesley, who went, I'm not going the way of Starfleet. It was because he was like, I am the super special.
He's better than Starfleet. Yeah.
So I just like seeing Jake, like the guy who can't keep his room clean. He's kind of a dirtbag, or not a dirtbag, but
he just wants to go spy on the Dabo girls. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
So it's cool. He doesn't really like, I don't know. It is just him, like it was a slice of an experience he had. I kind of like that.
I like to see more of that in just, we just talked about Aquiel, and like Aquiel is,
yes,
I don't think she's Starfleet material, but at the end of the episode, they have to go like, I'm going to do it someday. I'm going to get there. And it's like, no, you're not. I would like to see more stories where we see people who don't live up to Starfleet standards, and it's like, fine. It isn't like they're drummed out or they really failed us and we'll never see them in the same way. It's just like, hey, man, that's not my thing. I'm not interested in that at all.
That goes hand in hand with what we were speculating about, like how do people treat people who are like not war heroes. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It would be curious. Yeah, I want to see more from the ground level. Let's see a show with more just like normal, regular people.
For sure. Maybe we'll see that someday. Regular Starfleet, they're still going to have the technology of the future, which sometimes facilitates what our characters are doing, but just as often, it's the actual complication that they have to deal with. So on every show, we randomly pick from a list of Star Trek technologies, and we add what we get to the non-Trek media. We subtract it from the Trek episode and see how each is different. We call this our technological exchange. And here's the technology list that we pick from. It goes like this: phasers, holodecks, tricorders, transporters, warp drives, replicators, communicators, shields, advanced medical technology, and androids. And if I roll on my random number selecting technology, I get number 7, communicators. Perfect. If communicators existed in the world of the Red Badge of Courage, what do we get?
So easy. This is great. Well, first of all, no one knew what was going on.
No.
There you go. Give everyone a communicator. Whichever side gets the communicators, unless both of them have them.
There are no trucks. There are no helicopters. There are no ships. Remember, you're fighting this whole thing in the Appalachian Mountains, on the plains of the Midwest, and in New England. So every every regiment has to march somewhere, right? They're all marching on their feet. And moving a regiment somewhere, it's so important to have scouts. I think at this point, or was that too early? I think they had some kind of aerial. I think they could use like balloons for something. But anyway, the point is that intelligence is so important, because if you send the army to, Richmond or something like that, and the bad guys aren't in Richmond, you're screwed. That's just an army you don't get to use. And so if they could coordinate, if Lincoln could get on the horn, could FaceTime with Grant, and we could get everybody, Appomattox and everybody else together. Just think of what you could accomplish as compared to just having to rely on trumpets, and flags and horse messengers.
They could also have podcasts, and that could keep them company while they're marching.
Yeah, they would be listening to podcasts. At some point, Henry's going to call his mom from the tree. He thinks he's going to die. He knows it's going to happen. He's going to call his mom from the trench.
Right. Yeah. You'd never be lonely, instead of, you have to write letters.
Yeah.
That get narrated over some music.
Henry is, well, you're going to do Ken Burns this
time.
Stop Ken Burnsing. We're in the middle of a war. He's, Henry is like, no, I didn't run. And they're like, is this you? iPhone 14, 4K video of Henry booking it away from the battle video.
Yeah, there's a lot more accountability.
I saw some bad guys in the woods. Well, that's where I was going.
They'd be like, computer, where is Henry? Henry is not aboard the battlefield.
Right. Maybe you would even have an exchange of ideals to the point where there is no war. So I'm proposing a future, if we fast forward to 2022, where slavery still exists because Jefferson Davis FaceTime with Abraham Lincoln. They worked everything out. They got a deal where they get breaks. Slavery is not so bad. And they avoided this great war, which tore apart our nation. And John Travolta's in a movie about, but it's really bad. Slavery's
You think
bad.
Communicators could have bridged the gap?
Yeah, sure. Because all you can do is just send, at some point you go, hey, you're going to pass this law. We don't like the law. We quit. And then you go, well, geez, I guess we could send you letters or ambassadors, but if you're just going to quit, I guess this is war. But if you could call somebody up late at night and be like, Jeff, what are you doing, man? Listen, I'm Abraham Lincoln. We got to talk this out. You'd come up with something. You start dealing. You start wheeling and dealing. You give us some cotton. We'll give you some lobsters, and we'll work this thing out.
I don't know. I just feel like we have communicators now, and we can't bridge the gap.
Yes, but we have already learned the lessons of wars without these things, A telegraph's not going to cut it. I'm talking about a view screen, seeing somebody on a view screen. Maybe if we should cut to the real heart of this thing. And if we're talking about communicators, then we're talking about communications. And so the dispatches from the war would also be TV, holograms, whatever you want. So a guy like Stephen Crane, who was not alive then, but a war correspondent, would have full access to. So something like Andersonville, like the POW camps, people would see the horrors. It wouldn't just be rumors. It wouldn't be just something that like, oh, that's just Reb propaganda. You would see like the horrors of war in the same way that America turned against the Vietnam War, seeing soldiers come back, in body bags for the first time. We would instead see, the horrors of the Civil War. And again, the North would just give up. I don't know why I need the South to like win the Civil War so bad in this scenario.
Hey, it's real interesting. No.
Well, you always have to it's always got to be bad if you're going to do a Twilight Zone, right? It's got to be something's got to change, and that means it's bad because we live in the best timeline.
I think, do we?
Well,
if we had that sort of communication, maybe Stephen Crane is without a job. Because it's like, hey,
maybe he's just anybody could do his job. The soldiers themselves are like, did you check out the war TikToks? Oh, they were crazy.
Yeah,
it's kind of a flag.
It's kind of how like social media has disrupted, like the traditional news
now that's an
sources.
Ethan Hawke movie that I'd want to watch. Yeah.
Wait, the Skyping Civil War movie? I don't know. I said Skype. The Zoom Civil War movie.
Yeah. The flossing war. Well, what would happen if we took communicators away from the episode, nor the battle to the strong?
They couldn't get the message to them that...
Yeah, there's no episode.
Yeah, period. They've come back and they had a good time. And Jake... Well, what would happen is Jake would submit a really boring paper and he would get discredited as a journalist. And he would probably have to like enlist in Starfleet or something.
Yeah. Once again, it's like, well, I mean, we have to kind of keep our premise together here. So otherwise, there's no Starfleet.
There's no Starfleet.
They stumble across the planet, I guess. Isn't in the episode a lot of the communication like jammed by the Klingons in the first place?
Yes. Yeah, actually, there's...
So they're already kind of lacking communicators. I don't know. Maybe it would have to be a larger scope to have any effect on the story at all. Maybe this is a pass. I don't know.
Yeah. The best I could come up with is Jake has to write that boring paper. Do you think it would be really that boring? Or he just didn't know what Bashir was talking about?
But I don't know. Like... there's an angle, I think, for Jake's story. Jake gave up on his story too fast because apparently, first of all, never go to a medical conference because something bad is always going to happen on your way back. We know this from watching Star Trek. But I'd like to see like Bashir. Apparently, what he describes like some kind of melee, and God knows if it's just Bashir, aggrandizing something, but a bunch of like academics all screaming at each other over ganglion fibers or something like that. There's got to be a way to turn. I feel like I've read Verge articles like that before.
That's something that it seems like the people of Starfleet or the Federation would read.
Maybe that's what they got off on, yeah. Oh my God. I can't believe that doctor said that to that distinguished scientist.
Yeah, Jake's trying to act like the people want more lowbrow media.
Just give me the blood and guts. Yeah.
Yeah.
If it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah, no, like I feel like, Federation, like news and stuff like that would be like NPR,
Well, apparently there's like gotcha Fox News interviews on Federation TV in the future, in Picard's future.
Yeah, well, things
I'm telling you,
to fall apart.
I want this journalist. I want what is it? The Post. Not the Post, but Spotlight. I want Spotlight in Star Trek.
Oh, okay. Where they're investigating Section 31?
Investigative reporters in Star Trek. Yeah, come on. Give us that show.
Oh, Jake could be the lead.
Yeah. Sarah Lofton is, he'd like that.
Oh,
sure.
Man, yeah.
I love it. He's sitting behind a desk. He's got whatever the healthy 24th century equivalent of a cigar is, stalk of celery or something. He's like, give me those pictures.
Everyone's doing a Boston accent.
Yeah.
There's like an alien with a Boston. There's like an Andorian with a Boston accent.
Yeah. All right, boss. I'll get in the car. Yeah.
Get over in the shuttlecraft.
Oh, perfect. I like it. Well, I think we accomplished what we were looking for, and we conquered this story. Should we tell people it's coming up on the next episode of Backtracking?
Oh, yeah. So, the next episode, we are watching the Voyager episode Alice and seeing how it relates to the story and I guess the movie of the story Christine.
Yeah. I'm so excited about this. Our spooky month begins as we begin talking about spooky Halloween stories. And God, I'm looking forward to watching Christine again. And also, I guess, the Voyager episode. But yeah, can't wait to talk about that.
I'm excited. I think I've said this many times. I think Voyager at its best is when it's just trying to do like an action movie or like a horror movie or something like that. Yeah. And so I don't even remember this episode, but I have high hopes.
Well, you're in for a treat. So join us next time for that. That's it for this week's Backtracking. Thanks for listening. And if you like the show, tell a friend and follow us at Backtracking on Twitter. And you can tell us, too, what you think that we should look at in future episodes. And there is a link in our show notes if you'd like to join the Just Enough Trope Discord, where we talk about Star Trek, nerdy stuff in movies and TV. And if you want to talk about the Red Badge of Courage, we'll be there to talk about that as well. Gooey, tell the people where they can find you online.
You can find me on Twitter. I'm at GooeyFame.
And I'm at K1IBAN on Twitter, and you can find all of the shows and material on Just Enough Trope at Just Enough Trope on Twitter. And that is it for us for this week. We will see you soon, and until then, keep on trekking.